So I'm delighted to be back. For those of you that I haven't met, a bit of background to me. I've been running my own business since 2016. So like many of you, I'm a small business owner. Prior to that, I worked for a couple of very large organizations. Actually, I started my career at Linklaters. They're a global law firm, and moved after about 8 years. So in 2008, I moved to Merrill Lynch, which are, well, they were a huge investment bank, and they were taken over quite quickly after I joined by Bank of America. So I've worked in and for large organizations. And since I've been consulting, so as I said, I've been consulting, working for myself since 2016, I've had the privilege of working for organizations large and small. So I've worked with some household names, people that you would have heard of, people like the National Audit Office, people like Which, who are the consumer group. I'm sure many of you have seen they're doing a lot more advertising at the moment. You might have seen those on your travels or heard them on the radio. Wells Fargo, again, another large financial institution, as well as smaller organizations as well. And what's been really interesting to me is that actually, regardless of the size of the organization, many of the challenges that are experienced by organizations are actually really similar. So what I want to do today is to explore with you some of the things that you can do in order that you can find and keep the best people for your business. So it's focused really today is about bringing talent into your organizations, and then once you've found that talent and you've interviewed them and so on and so forth, how you go about retaining that talent. So as Jane has already said, what I've done is I've divided this session into 3 sections for you. There will be pause points as we go through at the end of each section so that you've got the opportunity to jot some stuff down and to reflect. By all means, pop some questions into the chat as we go along. If your questions are burning, I'm more than happy to take them as we go, but just know that there will be pause points at each point as we go through. All right, so let's get into the body of this. So when Elizabeth and I spoke about this session, she gave me this brief. She said the session should cover best practice in recruitment. It should be about creating the conditions for successful recruitment, how you go about engaging people in the vision and culture of your business. And so what we really wanted to do in this session was to start to build on the conversations that you have already been having around management and leadership. I'm conscious that you have already been talking about management and leadership and the difference between those two things. And so I would suggest to you that today is very much grounded in this idea of leadership and those things that as leaders within your businesses that you can do in order to be effective in this particular space. And so what we're going to do is a deep dive into how organizations can go about finding and keeping the best people. Now, what I would say to you is this really isn't an exact science. People just aren't an exact science. It's as simple as that. But there are absolutely some things that you can do which will stack the odds in your favor. So what I want to do is to really give you some practical ideas for what you can do. I've got some templates for things, as well as giving you some pause points to reflect on your own practices within your own businesses. So hopefully that sounds okay. Now, as I've said to you, this session is going to divide into 3 sections. We're going to kick off by talking about attracting great talent. So how you go about finding the best people for your business. We're then going to talk a bit about interviewing and securing great talent, because I guess many of us will have experience of interviewing, some people less so. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you about your experience of that, because it would be helpful for me to understand as a group where you are in relation to that. And finally, what I want to talk about is the role of culture in talent retention. Culture is one of those words which is bandied around a huge amount at the moment. It's hard to get hold of as a term, but I heard it described brilliantly the other day by a colleague of mine. And she said, culture is just this. Culture is how you feel on a Sunday night about going to work on Monday morning. And I thought that was a really brilliant way of describing it. It's also been described as the personality of an organization. So it's all of these things. Again, often it's described as the way we do things around here. So as we're talking this morning, as we're going through this content, what I'm going to be encouraging you to think about, hold in the back of your mind, is the culture that you have in your organizations, the culture that you want in your organization, and what that might mean for how you go about bringing people into the organization and ensuring that they want to stay. So let me kick off with a question for you. I'm going to ask you to pop this into chat. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very little experience and 10 being, yeah, this has been a core part of my role over the years, who's had experience of interviewing? So when I ask this question, I'm not asking it as the person being interviewed, I'm asking it in relation to the person doing the interviewing. So in terms of doing the interviewing, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is actually I've not had, I've done maybe a couple of interviews, but not very much, and 10 is yes, it's a core part of my role. Let me know what your numbers are. Okay, so some numbers coming in so far. Lovely. Okay, really helpful. So really mixed bag, which is really helpful. So as we're going through this, for those of you who have got more experience, then please by all means do offer your insights as well. And for those with less experience, if you've got questions for the group, you might want to jot them down or pop them into chat or hold them as you take that into the into your next sessions, which you will have after this. So that's really helpful. All right, so I've got another question for you in relation to this. This isn't a scale of 1 to 10 one. This is one which is just simply asking you to talk to me about the experiences that you've had of hiring, because many of us have had some experiences which are really great and some experiences of that interviewing and that hiring process that have been pretty awful. So start off, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps somebody. So Louise, I can see you've scored an 8. Josh, Karis, likewise. What have your experiences been of interviewing? The good, the bad, and the ugly. So any one of you, would you mind sharing?
For me, it's depended on the organisation I've been in, and they have different ways of interviewing. So some of the larger corporates I've been with, it's been very formal and very, lots of different competency questions, and maybe smaller organisations a bit more fluid. So been very varied.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly been my experience as well, Louise. The larger organizations have got this down to a fine art in many ways. They're quite slick. There are processes in place. What's interesting, though, is as I was putting the content together for this and I was reflecting on some of the processes that I've seen over the years, there are some that I would suggest no longer work. There are some that actually feel perhaps a little bit outdated. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah, absolutely, more formulaic, more structure for those larger businesses, perhaps less so for smaller businesses. Who else wouldn't mind sharing their experience?
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, thanks, Zoe. In terms of what I found, I think the bigger part was a connection with a culture. I think most recently, I struggled when the organisation had a written culture, but it wasn't necessarily a value which we led by, and we fair to say we hired based on skill set rather than individuals. And where I've had the most success and the most enjoyable interview process was when we were looking for the right people, and understanding we could train the skills on top of that.
It's such a good point. I think what sometimes organizations can become really stuck on, exactly as you say, is we must have this, we must have a degree, we need this particular qualification. And in actual fact, and this is what I was meaning about those sort of more old-fashioned ways of doing things, and certainly that's what I've seen in the past, that being the sort of the way people have gone about this. But in actual fact, more often than not, you can teach a lot of that stuff. And if you've got the right person for the organization that works well with your culture and will complement the people that are already working there, much more successful outcomes. So yeah, thanks, Josh, for sharing that. And we'll certainly talk more about that as we move through. Anyone had any horror experiences of interviewing? I've certainly got one that comes to mind. Go for it.
I've got a horror experience of being interviewed when I turned up to an interview. And it was 5 o'clock on a Friday at a PR agency in central London, and they were all at their desks drinking beer. and they came into the interview and offered me a beer, and I didn't know whether it was a kind of test on whether what I should do. That really threw me, and that was a horror story. And I learned from that to not try and kind of play psychological games with interviewees in the future.
It's such. What did you take the beer in the end? I would have had that.
I didn't.
Didn't. Yeah.
No, I didn't know whether that was the right or the wrong thing.
It's really tricky, isn't it? And I think those sorts of things, I talked about culture earlier, those sorts of things really talk to an organization's culture and what they're trying to say to the person who they are potentially bringing on board. And so it probably meant nothing at all. It probably wasn't a test at all. It happened to be Friday. They happened to be having a beer, and would you like one? But as you've quite rightly observed, we as employees or potential employees, we pick all of this stuff up and we read things into it. So now we're sitting on the other side of the desk. It's really incumbent upon us to say, well, OK, how might this be interpreted? What might the meaning of this? How might this make the other person feel? So something that we really need to be conscious of. The other word that you used, Karis, which I really liked, was, is this a test? And I think that's oftentimes how a lot of people coming into an interview environment feel. And I think certainly the way that perhaps we have gone around interviewing in the past is that this is a test and we're looking to catch those people out. And as the interviewer, we feel clever that we've managed to trip them up. And that's absolutely not the way we want to be going about doing this. And that's absolutely not the way that we're going to bring the best people into our organizations, because frankly, those people will look at that, look at our behavior and go, no, thank you. I don't think this is somewhere where I want to be working. So again, we'll talk all about this today. The example that I have in mind is one, I wasn't party to it, but I heard about it afterwards. It was a client who was interviewing for a role, and the candidate had a virtual interview first of all, and then had come to meet with the C-suite actually to sort of really finish off the hiring process. Everybody thought this person would likely to be hired, and in the interview they stopped the interview and said, I'm really sorry, I don't think this is working for either of us. I'm not going to waste any more of my time or yours, and left the interview. Now, I don't know exactly what happened. I wasn't there, but I can take a fairly good guess, knowing the people that they were sitting in front of, that exactly what I just described had happened. The people that they were sitting in front of, I suspect, were trying to catch them out, were interviewing in a particular way that made this individual think, I don't want to work in an environment like this, and they voted with their feet. So it's very different now than how it was, and we as I said before, we will talk more about that. So okay, are there any questions at this point, or any comments that people would like to make before I move us on? No? Okay, lovely. All right, so this is the first section of the three that I described to you. And we're going to talk about attracting great talent. Now, the first thing that I want to ask you as business owners, as people who are out with in the environment at the moment, is simply this: what's your perception of the job market currently? Not a trick question, not a loaded question. I'm just interested to know what's out there. What's your perception?
In accounts, it's still very hard coming off the back of COVID, although it is easing, but finding qualified accountants at any level is very difficult. Okay,
really, really interesting. What's causing that, do you think?
It's still coming off back of COVID, where I suppose a lot of the larger firms at the beginning of COVID stopped recruiting. So it's a 3-year cycle. And what's happened there, you're coming into that 3-year cycle where suddenly there is no trainee or newly qualified accountants. And the ones who are out there are demanding so much money or money, whatever benefits, whatever it is, where they want to work, and they get the choice. Yes. So if you want to work in London firms will pay you a lot of money, give you a laptop and stay at home.
Yes.
No matter where you are in the country. I'm in Milton Keynes, so it's about an hour, 45 minutes on the train to central Milton Keynes. But if you're told you only come in 1 day a week and you get London waiting, whatever, it makes it very difficult for even a firm our size to recruit on a realistic salary.
Yeah, and I think, and that's a real difficulty, I think, for people that are in commutable distance from London, as you say, particularly now London firms are offering that flexibility where you kind of think, well, actually, I haven't got to do that hour and a half 2-hour commute every day. I only have to do a couple. Well, I can live with that. And like you say, work from home the rest of the time. So it makes it much more challenging. There's some comments coming in as well. Difficult to find candidates here too for Emma. Bathroom installers was critical just after COVID, especially for HGV drivers. Market now seems better, more people looking for work. Yeah, I would agree. Had 20 applicants recently for an admin job. Okay, so it's sounding like a really mixed bag. I'll talk to you a little bit about what I'm noticing, and I think it really echoes what you've been saying. I think what I would say is that actually, although the market there are more people at the moment, and in fact, what we would suggest to you is that actually it's a much more candidate-rich environment than it has been in the past. That being said, the question for you is, and is alluding to exactly what James was saying and what's been written in the comments already, is, are these the candidates that you actually want? So what we're suggesting to you is great candidates have high demand skill sets and potential, and they themselves are in great demand. So the top 10% of candidates are the top 10% of candidates, regardless of the market that you happen to be working in. And so I think sometimes what happens is organizations will sort of say, okay, look, the market's pretty rich with candidates at the moment, and we can rest on our laurels. But in actual fact, I would suggest to you, regardless of what the market is doing, is in order to get the best people, the top talent in inverted commas, as we would often refer to it, is that actually you need to be thinking about how you're attracting and how you're retaining your good people all the time. This isn't just sort of a rest on your laurels because things are easier now, or really go for it because things are harder. Your employee value proposition is something that you want to be thinking about all of the time. And when I'm talking about employee value proposition, and I'll talk more on this I'll talk in more detail on this later on, what we're really thinking about is, what's the culture like in our business? What's it like to work here? What are our values like? What kind of development am I able to offer? It's all of the things that you will want to think about that will cause someone to say, okay, this is somewhere where I want to be. This is an attractive place for me to be working. And so in terms of trends that I'm seeing in the market, again, is exactly what you're describing. So remote working is here to stay. There's no two ways about this. And certainly what I'm seeing, and I suspect you are too, is that those organizations that have ordered people back to work have not had an easy time of it. People have voted with their feet and they said, okay, that's fine. If that's what your policy is, you want everyone back in the office, good for you. I'm not going to be part of that. And we saw that through the Great Resignation, partly because of the way that people were wanting to be able to work, i.e. to have that remote working opportunity, but also partly because people had, I think, a different view on things post-COVID. They looked at their lives, the way they were living. You know, it caused people to sort of take a pause and think about what it is they want from work beyond simply receiving a paycheck. So again, this word employee value proposition comes back into play again when we're thinking about, well, okay, while we might not be able to match the salaries of those larger London organisations, what is it that we can offer that's a bit different, that talks to our values, to our culture, to what it's like to actually be part of this particular organisation, rather than something which is somewhat more faceless, the EYs, the KPMGs, and so on and so forth. So worth thinking about, you know, what is it that we might be able to offer. The other thing that I would talk to on this, and for some of you this will be more relevant than others, is that actually location is no longer a limiting factor for when you're thinking about your talent pool. So to the extent to which you're saying, okay, we're based here, but actually because you're able to work remotely 90% of the time, we can advertise all over the place. It doesn't matter. My sister is an HR director, and that's certainly something when she has been recruiting in people into her team, opening up her search for a role that she has found particularly difficult to fill, has been hugely beneficial to her. Her candidate pool was opened much more widely because she was able to think outside the box, to use a cliche, and go elsewhere. I've just seen a comment, Karis, you've just taken on an associate based in Panama. That's fantastic. Talk to us about how you went about sourcing this candidate, Karis.
It's an extreme example, isn't it? So I thought
Isn't
I'd put
it?
it forward. Well, actually, she approached me because she's seen our social media and read about the kind of work that we do and what we're about, and put forward a case to work with us. So that's how that came about. I didn't just go and find someone based in Panama. She's actually based some of the time in the UK and some of the time in Panama. But yeah, so she approached us based on what we put out, which was, I suppose, an example of trying to put out a brand that's consistent with our values and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and again, picking up this word employee value proposition again, when you're thinking about that, so your future story will be able to talk about this individual with their permission. You know, the previous incumbent was able to do this, they lived like this, half the time here, half the time there. It's about who we are as an organization. We value the diverse perspective she brings, and so on and so forth. So the extent to which you're talking very openly about that is really positive and really powerful. And I think what's interesting is Karis, you've obviously had some learning from that because this individual approached you. The extent to which other people within this group are able to say, oh, that's really interesting, and proactively go and look in different markets in the UK or beyond, I think would be something which would be well worth making a note of, and sort of, you know, just pausing and thinking a little bit differently about, for those of you where that's appropriate. I fully recognise looking at some of your businesses, having an employee in Panama would be totally unfeasible depending on what it is you're hiring for, but certainly something which for many of you would be worth thinking about, I would suggest. I touched on diversity and inclusion in that previous comment that I was making, and I would suggest to you that candidates are more focused on this than ever before. So being really conscious about what it is that you are, again, what your brand is saying, what you're putting into the market, about the extent to which you value diversity, the extent to which you value different people's experiences and would welcome those in your organization is really positive messaging that you want to be giving. Video interviews, I would suggest, have become the norm, and you can use these in a variety of ways. You might want to use video interviews for your first screening of candidates before you meet with them in person. It's a really convenient way of meeting people quickly, and it works for other candidates as well. I've touched on this already, but I certainly have seen a trend where companies are needing to sell themselves much more than they have in the past. That has always been the case. Again, for those of you that have worked with larger organizations, it's certainly something which organizations that I've worked with, and I know a number of you will have as well, have been really proactive about. And they do that with good reason. They do that because they want to have the pick of the best candidates. So they're selling themselves pretty hard in order that they then are able to say, come and work with us. And people say, yes, please, we pick you because we have heard about all of the great things that you are doing in relation to things like diversity and inclusion or corporate social responsibility or whatever it might be. And so to that end, there is much greater focus on company culture, as I've already spoken a little bit about. And I would say to you that, you know, a while ago it was really trendy to have, you know, things like bean bags and ping pong tables and reception, all of this sort of stuff. Actually, while those things are nice and optically they look good, and they can't, those things are gimmicky, they cannot replace strong company culture. So if you don't have the budget for ping pong tables in reception and slides going into ball pits in order for people to access different floors in your building, don't worry about that. That's not what company culture is. Company culture is, as I have already described, how people feel about coming to work on Monday morning, the way things are done around here in your organization that causes people to want to continue to be part of your organization. So let's build on some of this. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls that that we often see in recruiting. And I think the first one, it sounds really obvious, but not knowing what you need. I think oftentimes what happens, I've seen this in organizations large and small, is somebody hands in their notice and there's something of a blind panic as people go, oh my goodness, we're already really stretched. We need to hire somebody in really quickly. But my recommendation would be actually take a pause. Because it may well be that what this resignation does is it frees up some budget, it frees up some headcount, and what you might want to think about is, do we need a like replacement? Is it possible that there are actually now people within the organisation who, with some training, we would be able to upskill into the role that this person is vacating, and therefore we could use this headcount differently. We could use this headcount, this budget, to hire in another direction. In some cases, yes, in some cases, no. But I would suggest to you that just taking that beat, taking that pause and thinking, well, okay, do we really need to do a like-for-like replacement, or might we be able to do something different with this headcount is certainly something that in teams that I've run over the years, we would always ask ourselves that. And as things were changing, certainly in the environment that I was working in, the answer to that question became, do we need more people like me that are sort of trainers, or people that are facilitators, people that are coaches? Do we need more of those sorts of people? Or do we need more people who are able to put together e-learning type programs? Totally different skill set. And so that enabled us to be able to evolve our offering further. Not having a clear process, again, we've spoken a little about this already, but having a clear process is really important. It will save you time in the long run, and it will also mean that that your practices, your interviewing practices are much fairer for people. They'll have a much better experience of it, because when you're interviewing different people, you will be asking the same questions, same sorts of questions for each of those people that you're interviewing. So what you want to do, I would suggest, even if you're not hiring at the moment, and I'll share some templates in a minute, is thinking about what processes don't we have in place and would be really helpful for us to get in place now, so they're ready for when we need them. And then finally, not being clear on the benefits of working for your company. So being really clear about what is it that's great about your company. Why should people want to work for you? At the back end of this presentation, I'll give you some questions which I think will help you to reflect on that. But being able to tell a story around the benefits of working for your company is really, really key. It will help you out at interview. It will help you think about the brand that you're putting out into the marketplace. Okay, so let's talk about some of the best practices in recruitment that are out there. So step one, write really clear and accurate adverts that include skills, experience and education requirements. And this is something clearly that Karis has already done quite successfully. So for those of you that haven't seen the advert that she put out there, it would be well worth asking to see it, because obviously, Karis, I would suggest that what you put out into the market caused somebody to say, oh, actually, maybe I could come and work here. So it provided them with opportunity. Go ahead, Karis.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interject. I didn't write an advert at all. This person contacted me speculatively.
Totally off the bat. Wow.
Totally speculatively after seeing our stuff, basically.
Okay, really interesting. So if not the advert, then certainly the stuff would be interesting to have a look at. This is a controversial one, but you will have seen this spoken about on LinkedIn, I suspect. Include the salary in your job adverts. My hope would be that actually your internal salaries have already been fairly benchmarked and are consistent, and therefore there's really no reason not to share the salary. The reason that I say that is because if you don't share the salary, what happens is you may well end up having people apply that actually the salary is never going to work for them. It's not going to work. It's not high enough. So actually, by including the salary, what you do is you will allow people to sort of put themselves out of the process and save you quite a lot of time in the long run, rather than what I think oftentimes happens is you go through this process and it's brilliant and you're getting towards the end and you finally have that conversation about salary and it's 20,000 lower than what their expectations were. So putting a salary range in up front, I would suggest would be a sensible thing to do. It says include education requirements, and I think that's certainly the case. One of the things that, again, that I'm seeing organisations are doing less and less of now is suggesting that a degree is a requirement for them, because actually to go to university, I was reading now, costs in the region of £60,000 by the time you finish. Elizabeth's daughter's at university. She's nodding and not smiling, I know, but it's in that region, I think, isn't it, Elizabeth? After a 3-year course, and so the reason, so what that means is for some people, for some students that would be more than capable of going to university, it's simply just not possible for them. So while the capability is there, the financial ability may well not be. So do you really need to have a degree in order to work for your organisation, or is it possible that you can test this through other things, or you can take on apprentices and so on and so forth? And again, lots of larger organisations are thinking about that and how they offer those now. Variety of different avenues, so social media, other marketing tools. Really what you're looking to do is to ensure that you get a really diverse pool of talent that you're able to bring into your organisation. Again, talking to this idea of not looking to replace in a like for like way. The other thing that you might want to think about is to provide in advance some of the things that you're going to be talking about at interview. So as I've already said, as Keris and I would discuss, it's not about testing people. It's about setting them up for success and ensuring that they are able to present themselves in the best possible way. So while you're not going to want to give them a list of here's my script of interview questions, what you might want to say is we're going to be exploring, I don't know, your use of budgets, or how you might market us as an organisation, or whatever it might be. So give them a general idea of topics so that they're set up for success in the interview stage. Consistent hiring process we've already spoken about. The other thing that I wanted to add to that is think beyond just interviews. So interviews are great, good way of getting to know people, but actually what might be more appropriate is getting people to demonstrate the skills that they already have. So if you're looking for a machine specialist, for example, invite them in to show you how that might work. Certainly in my line of work, I've been to interviews over the years, of course, but often what I'll be asked to do is to run a 15-minute session of a training program, because what people are looking to see is, while I may come across well in an interview, it may well be that actually what I'm not terribly good at is helping people to learn. I might not be terribly good at presenting. So giving people the opportunity to demonstrate the skills for the role that they're actually interviewing for is a really great way of you being able to see, is this person going to be good for my business? You want to make sure that the candidate has a positive experience through the recruitment process, and I would suggest to you that in the current market that's particularly important, because in some sectors, as we've already talked about, roles are more scarce. You talked about here, Emma, our admin role attracted 53 candidates, and actually what that tells us is that for those types of roles, there are probably more people out there than there are jobs for them to do. And that is going to cause a degree of uncertainty, of anxiousness, of people perhaps not performing well in the interview as they could have, because they're feeling really anxious about whether or not they're going to be able to get a job or not. This might be the 8th, 10th interview they've already been to. So the extent to which you can help them, to put them at their ease, to reassure them, will allow them to perform better, and also talks to the culture of your business, I would suggest. Providing regular feedback to candidates as you go through the process. Oftentimes organisations have quite a long recruitment process because simply because they're meeting quite a lot of people and scheduling things in. But if you've been one of the first people that have been interviewed and you still haven't heard anything 2 or 3 weeks later, well, guess what? You're continuing to interview elsewhere. So if actually you really like that first person, tell them, keep them involved with, you know, we're meeting with a few other people, but we'd like to invite you in again. We really like, etc., etc. So keep them looped into the process and connected with your business as best you can. So let's think now then about attracting a diverse talent pool. So I've talked a little about this already. So some reflection questions as we reach the sort of the middle point of this particular section. So who's your target audience for recruits? Because depending on who your target audience is, you're going to be needing to think differently about where you're talking about your organization, whether that be through job adverts or whether through just sort of the way that you're talking about your organization more generally. So what is it they read? What are they watching? What ideas do you have for advert placement that might be appropriate? So LinkedIn is a really great place for a lot of organizations to recruit. It's not necessarily appropriate for all organizations. It may well be that employee referrals are something that you want to think about. Maybe that your local paper is somewhere. Those magazines sometimes that you get through the door. I don't know if any of you know those sort of local magazines. I've seen job adverts there over the year. Maybe it's on Instagram. Maybe it's on Facebook. Maybe it's on Mumsnet. The more you can think about where might I want to be placing adverts that will attract different sorts of candidates into this talent pool, the more diverse you're going to your talent pool is going to be. Thinking about what you found has worked well in the past. And I would also suggest to you, good people know good people. So whose network could you tap into? And so this is certainly something that has been really successful for me over the years, is just talking to people. And it may well be that they're not even in the market for a new job. It may well be that I'll talk to a colleague of mine and say, you know, do you know anyone who X, Y, you know, who might be able to do this, that, or the other? And they'll say, yes. In fact, I met somebody the other day, and so on and so forth. So the more you can be having those sorts of conversations, the more I think you're going to be able to widen that list of people that you can approach. So I talked about templates earlier. I said that I would come back to that for you. So this is horribly small, for which I apologise, but what I have done is attach the link there. So this is a really great site with templates for job adverts that you can use. The one that I've popped up on the screen here is for an intern role, but on this site they've got lots of other examples as well. It may well be that you want to have a standard template for your jobs, and you could adapt this intern one. And so really the adaptation is going to be around the type of language that you're using within that, the level of detail, the sorts of experience, and so forth. I won't say too much more on this, as I say, because there's a great site and you'll have these slides afterwards, so you can take a look on that. Couple of things to talk about in relation to inclusive hiring practice on this. Just watch your language in adverts. I think it probably goes without saying now, but worth flagging. I think most people have realised that you want to be using terms like you or they rather than he or she. You don't want to be implying that you're looking for a particular gender for a particular role. Again, there's you have probably come across a term called gendered language, whereby some terms are considered to be more male, some terms are considered to be more female. So for example, you know, interpersonal or supportive are terms which are more generally used to describe women. Competitive or leader are more male terms. Again, if you do a quick Google around gendered language, you'll find a list of those terms which speak to one gender more than the other. So if you're looking to hire, if you're looking to get a diverse pool, just think about the type of language that you're using. It's an exercise that we did years and years ago, actually, at Linklaters. They were fairly ahead of their time in their thinking about this. And when we looked at the adverts that we were putting out, it was fascinating to see quite how male the adverts actually were. So worth having a look at, just for your interest, if nothing else. Focus on transferable skills, as I've already talked about. So rather than saying 5+ years of agile experience, for example, do you really need 5+ years of agile experience, or would experience in another in another area be useful? What are the skills that people already have that are transferable? Because again, what you will find is the more criteria you put around must have a degree, must have 5 years of this, must have, you will find that, well, actually, typically what will happen is women will rule themselves out of that, whereas men will go, oh, I could probably do that. And they won't rule themselves out. So the extent to which you can just help yourselves by keeping your pool more diverse is just thinking about, one, the language that you're using, and two, the level of experience that really you need, so that people don't rule themselves out. Things on neurodiversity to think about. To what extent is this going to work for people perhaps who have dyslexia? So there are certain typefaces that particularly work for people who are dyslexic or not, and there will no doubt be some people on this call who will be able to talk to that, or will have family members who are dyslexic. My daughter is dyslexic, and I know that, for example, Comic Sans as the typeface, or Arial, these are things that she finds easier to read than other typefaces. So, well, sometimes what you might see is organizations will want to use a different typeface to be sort of more quirky or artistic. Is that going to work for somebody who is dyslexic, for example? So just giving some thought to that. You might want to make a statement along the lines of our recruitment team, or we, if you don't have a recruitment team, which I suspect most of you won't, we're happy to support with any reasonable adjustments that are needed within the recruitment process. So again, just really making it clear that you are an inclusive employer through these adverts. Job template, again, I won't dwell on this. You'll have the slides afterwards, but some pretty clear things that need to be on there. The job title, keep it simple. I would suggest. Be clear on who they're reporting to, brief overview of the job, the sorts of responsibilities and duties that they will have, and any qualifications that they need, and experiences, and so on and so forth. So again, for some of you who I've met before, you will have seen this slide before, and for those of you that I haven't met before, here it is, and use as is useful. So as we come to the end of this section, some things to think about. So you want clearly defined job descriptions, templates that can be adapted for all job adverts, some core interview questions that are used consistently in interview. We're going to talk about interview questions next. I'm going to give you some of those. Again, some of you will also have interview questions that you might want to share with one another as well. Competency-based questions that are values-based. We'll talk about competency-based questions in the next section. And finally, it's really important that you don't oversell this opportunity. There's a real balance between finding the sort of selling the role, but also not overselling it, because I think what sometimes happens at interview is that we're really keen and we really like this person and we want them to come in, but in reality, the job might be somewhat different to what is being described. And certainly I have seen that and spoken to people that that's happened to over the years. So being realistic about, actually, you're going to have the opportunity to do this, but I want to be really honest, there's also going to be a fair amount of doing this kind of stuff as well. And is that okay? How does that land for you? Okay, so some questions for you to think about. What are you already doing well and you can share with others in this next section? And where do you need to have greater focus, and what help would you like from others? So I'm going to stop speaking for a couple of moments. By all means, take a moment just to jot these questions, jot your answers down to these questions. If you have any questions for me or others in the group, then by all means, please either pop them into the chat or shout them out to me.
Just a very quick one, Zoe, on housekeeping. Can I just check with everyone? Is everyone on slide 21? Good.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
No problem. Just another 30 seconds or so to jot down your thoughts. Emma, I can see you're typing. So I'll just take your question as well. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on, and Emma, I'll just keep an eye out for your note as well. Oops, typing. Here we go. What does everyone think about recruitment for a role continually, i.e., building a bank of interested applicants? How far down the process should we go? Interesting question. What does the group think? Emma, do you want to give a bit more context around that? Feels like there's a backstory there.
Well, so I'm recruiting bathroom installers. So there's a big difference between what we offer and the traditional role that a bathroom installer would have, that would be maybe self-employed or working under CIS rather than PAYE. So that conversation, the troubles we've come into in the past is that we have been a bit reactive with our recruitment. If we've had someone leave, or if we've suddenly got a burst of work and our pipeline's getting too long, and we're spending quite a lot of time on people who are then saying, oh, I don't really want to be employed. So I'm wondering how much of that I could, build a bank of applicants who I can guide through that process to almost let them deselect themselves if they want to. But whether that would give you a reputation out in the job market for, I don't want to string somebody along. That's kind of where I'm at.
It's a really interesting question. I can see Trisha's got some thoughts. So you do that with HGV drivers. So Trisha, talk to us about that.
So we employ, can we hear me? We employ about 30 odd full-time HGV drivers, mainly all employed really. But when people phone through and we don't actually have a vacancy, we find it's very useful to keep their details, put them in a pool, and say when we are recruiting, we'll contact you, because we also have peaks and troughs, and it could be that some self-employed people that you mentioned, Emma, may want to do some temporary contract work for us. So I find it useful to, if their skill set matches what we look for, definitely useful to have a conversation, even if you're not recruiting at that moment in time.
I absolutely love that as an answer. I mean, I think you're right, Emma. I think what you absolutely don't want to do is string people along or to have a reputation. But I think if you're honest, we're always looking for great people. Get in touch. We might not have anything at the moment, but we'll certainly keep your details on file. If you're interested, come and have a conversation. And as you say, people will either rule themselves in or rule themselves out. Certainly, I don't know about others in this group, but when I set up on my own, that was certainly, had I read something like that, I would have got in touch with somebody like that, just in case they had some associate type work that I would be able to do for them. And if it came to something great, if it didn't, it didn't. So I think offering that out into the market actually, and being proactive in that way, there's no harm at all. But I do think it's about honesty rather than stringing people along, as you quite rightly say.
Sorry. One thing we do, which, sorry, Emma, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry. I don't know if it's similar to what Emma's talking about, but what we recently do, and I do sometimes, we go into school and talk to 15 and 16-year-olds about accountancy, not Tilly Hopkins, but the teachers also let us, we do some summer intern work as they get older, and we follow them through university. And then if there's a gap year, we sometimes have a gap year. So we're trying to just bring our name to people and bring them into our firm, so we don't always take them all on, don't get me wrong, but we can see what they're like, they learn our culture, and we're building that pool of people who could be trainees to come in. I don't know if that's similar to what Emma was saying, but that's what we're trying to do now. And that goes to, if they don't want to use university, if they just want to do A-levels and come in, we're looking at different age groups as well, just trying to mix it up a bit. But
I think it's I think it's such a good idea. It's certainly something that the larger organizations are doing now, but not everybody wants to work for a really large, or some people want to work for a local organization, something that feels much more manageable for them. And so absolutely, going into schools and universities, I would 100% advocate for, again, having a daughter who's sort of coming up to GCSEs and then A levels, having organizations come in. Increasingly now we're getting communications from the school talking about organizations that are doing that. So if that was something that you decided that you wanted to do, know that that's I'm not going to say a well-trodden path, but it is a trodden path by other people who are also recognizing, as you have, James, that this is a really good way of securing future talent. Okay, I'm going to move us on now and talk a little bit about interviewing. We've spoken a bit about this already, but the point that I really want to make around this is, as I've said before, it's not about testing them, it's about setting them up for success. So some things that you're going to want to consider. So the environment that you conduct the interview in. So first up, is it appropriate that maybe the first interview is virtual rather than inviting them into the office? That may work. That may work well for some of you. For more senior roles, increasingly the way that I have seen this being done is people will talk about, well, do you want to go and have a coffee and we'll just have a chat about what it is you're looking for and what we do. And so actually that initially it's not really an interview at all, other than a chat whereby, this is what we do. Tell me a bit about yourself. How does that work for you? So thinking about it being more informal in that way and starting to build your pool, exactly as we've just talked about, might be a good thing to do. Be on time. I'd like to say, I think this probably goes without saying. It's certainly not something that in my early career I was particularly good at. I would tend to be sort of running from meeting to meeting and perhaps arrive at the interview being frankly underprepared and maybe coming across as a little bit flustered. So actually just making sure that you've held some time in your diary before the interview to have a look at their CV and to review the questions that you're particularly wanting to ask. As I say, it should go without saying, but certainly something that I was poor at back in the day. We've talked about this already. How might the candidate be feeling? What is it that you can do that could put them at their ease? Certainly from what we've already spoken about, not offering them a beer, I would suggest. Definitely don't offer them alcohol. That may be seen as a test. You could certainly offer them a coffee, ask them how their journey's been, that sort of stuff. Helping them to shine. So again, we're not trying to catch them out. We're giving them the opportunity to demonstrate their potential. So again, sending out the sorts of questions that you might ask in advance would be something that you might want to think about doing. Creating an agenda and sticking to it. So the agenda might be something like this. It might be, you tell them a little bit about the organisation and the role. Then you ask them some questions, so then they have the opportunity to speak, and then you leave plenty of time at the end. And this is often the bit that I think gets missed, for them to ask any questions that they have. I've certainly sat in interviews where I'm the one being interviewed, where they go, right, we've literally got 30 seconds, but have you got any questions you'd like to ask? Again, then you're in that really awkward position of, well, actually I do, but you've just told me that you don't want me to ask a question. So it's that sort of thing. What's the tone that's been set here? And so really sort of providing enough time that the candidate has the opportunity to ask the questions that you had. If you would like to offer work experience, sorry, I can't. Oh, I see. Sorry, I'm just seeing the things that are coming. So some really nice links that are being shared in the chat at the moment, so worth holding on to those for afterwards. So I've got some interview questions. Again, I'm not going to read all of these out. You'll have the slides afterwards, but you might want to add some of these to your repertoire. And what I've done in bold is the question, and then in the sort of grey text is the reason that you might want to ask this question. So what skills and strengths can you bring to this position? So look for people who can describe how their abilities and attributes will benefit your company. How would colleagues describe your personality? The applicant's work style should complement those of others in the team. So this is why you're looking to ask the questions that you're looking to ask. So I've got a couple of slides with questions on there for you. quite like this one. What's the most interesting project you've worked on professionally? It'll really give you a sense of the extent to which the candidate's able to sort of talk quite freely and with enthusiasm about the work that they do. And that's certainly, I think, in most roles, what you're looking to see is, does the person care about this? Are they interested in this, in their chosen profession? So those are some questions that you could use. Competency-based interviewing is something, again, another term which is often bandied around. Who's come across competency-based interviewing, and what does it mean? Yeah, a few of you who would like to offer. Yep, go for it.
Sorry, I've done quite a few competency-based. I've done the interviews and I've also given them, and it's just a case of giving examples of how you would act in a certain situation. So yeah, it could be anything really. How would you deal with this, a conflict, or how you would, what you're proud of and how you achieved it, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it could be very broad and lots of, but it's just having lots of different examples for those types of questions. That's how I found as a candidate getting through them was good.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So you're being asked a competency-based question when it starts like, tell us about a time when, or could you provide us of an example when you, or could you describe how you went about? So those are the sort of, so if you're wanting to write a competency-based interview question, and again on the previous slide you will have seen there's some competency-based questions there. So that second one down, can you provide an example of how you handled a workplace conflict, would be an example of a competency-based question. And so you will want to have, I would suggest, a pool of competency-based questions that would be useful for you to ask, that will test the sorts of things that are important for you in your business, and that will vary from business to business. But again, the extent to which you can share those with one another and then adapt the questions might be something which is a good thing to do. So what I want to do now is to talk about what you can't ask about. I don't want to dwell on this because we could end up disappearing down a rabbit hole on here, and there's plenty of literature out there around this. However, the way that my colleague would talk about the 9 protected characteristics, and that's what you have up here, is really when you're thinking about these in relation to work, this is the bar below which you should not fall. So what we're thinking about is you want to, as organizations, go beyond just being legal. You want to be thinking about how actually do we come across as an organisation in relation to the things that we've spoken about already in relation to inclusion. So if you're thinking, well, what can't I ask about? As a general rule of thumb, if you're asking about one of the 9 protected characteristics, you just don't want to be asking that question. So, for example, what you don't want to be asking is, well, and here's 2 examples that my mother was asked, and she's not that old. I mean, I'm fairly anyway. So questions that some of you may well have been asked. Are you married? Can't ask that. Do you have plans to have a family? So those are questions that she was asked. Probably about, I don't know, 40, 50 years. And those are absolutely things that are just, you absolutely cannot ask. You cannot ask those now. So I haven't listed all of the questions you can't ask. There would be myriad questions. My advice would, as I say, be think about the 9 protected characteristics. They're there for you, and avoid asking questions about personal characteristics that are protected by law. So I'm going to pause there just to check that there aren't any questions on this that are burning. I would hope there aren't, but again, something that you might want to have in this session or take into the next session if you're not sure. Again, if you're not sure, I don't know whether I should ask this. My advice would be, if you're not sure, you probably shouldn't ask it, is generally the way that I would think about this. Okay, so some reflection questions for you again on this. So this is a much shorter section, just thinking about interview questions, the questions that you have, the competency related questions, and the things that you can't ask about. So what are you already doing well and can share with others? So same questions as last time. And where do you need to have greater focus? And what help would you like from others around these? So again, I'll just pause there for a minute so that you can have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have and to jot down some thoughts for yourselves. Okay, ready? All right, so this is the last section for us where we want to talk about culture in relation to talent retention. So this is really sort of thinking about, okay, well, we've gone through the hiring process, we've brought somebody into the organisation. And this is where I've got really recent experience of this. A friend of mine who was hired into a very large organisation who will remain nameless and has had a pretty torrid time of it, actually. You would expect the processes to have been better than they were. Things like didn't meet her manager for really quite a long time. They went on holiday, I think probably the day before she joined, so that was pretty awful. She was hired into a team which were largely working virtually. So again, just keeping that in mind, actually, particularly, you know, for those of you that are office-based, it's really lonely joining an organisation at the best of times, let alone if you're doing it remotely. So what things need to be in place that will help people to learn more about you as a business, about your culture, when in the past, people would have just picked that stuff up by osmosis. They just would have been around the building more. They just would have heard and seen, you know, what is it that you're going to need to be much more proactive about putting in place to ensure that people have a good experience of your organization. So last time I was with a version of this group, I talked a little bit about onboarding. So this is beyond just sort of the typical induction. Here's the fire escapes, here's the toilet, and so on and so forth. Fill in these forms. When we're thinking about onboarding, what we're really thinking about is how can I bring them into the organization and make sure that they have the information they need to be successful from the get-go. I've got some questions which I will offer you in just a minute that will help you to think more about that. You want to be sitting down with them pretty regularly, I would say. You want to be setting them goals. You want to be talking about the tools that they need to do their job. What support and guidance do they need? There will be some people who will need a lot more of this than others, depending on the level of experience they've had from previous organisations, and oftentimes depending on their level of maturity. And I don't mean that in relation to age. I just mean in relation to their maturity in terms of, you know, how they have been around businesses in previous parts of their lives. You want to think about training and development, learning and development. Elizabeth, you quite rightly called me out on that earlier, but sometimes it is training, but broadly speaking, learning and development. And there's a really nice quote from Richard Branson that goes something along the lines of train them so well that they can leave, but treat them so well that they don't want to, or words to that effect. But you get the idea. What you really want to be doing as an organisation is upskilling your people to the highest possible standard that they can be. The slide says here necessary development. I would suggest going on beyond just necessary development. What other things could really support them? And again, when we were thinking about employee value proposition earlier, development is certainly something that that would be included in that. So the training that people are able to receive and to have access to, and it may well be, or the time that they are given in order to be able to do that. There's so much available online now. It may well be that it's not about sending somebody on a course. It may well be that, you know, people are offered X amount of hours per month for their own personal development. Again, that's part of your employee value proposition. So in terms of those questions I mentioned, these are the things that everybody who is joining a new organization wants to know, what is it that I'm here to do? What is my job? That sounds really obvious, but actually, again, my friend, it was not entirely clear from what she was describing what it was that she was actually meant to be focusing on. She is working as a project manager, but obviously that's hugely broad and there are a variety of different projects. So actually being really clear on that for people is important. What do I have at my disposal to do it? So if people don't have direct reports that they're able to get to help them to do things, what else is available to them to be able to support? What do they need to know to succeed? This isn't the stuff that's written in the staff handbook. This is the stuff that, in order to get stuff done around here, this is the person that you really need to talk to. The person that knows where all the bodies are buried is this person. It's those sorts of things. This is what I mean about culture. This is what culture is. It's that sort of knowledge, and the faster that you can help people to know the right people and how to get stuff done in your organization, the better it can be. There was certainly in my previous organization, there was a PA to the MD that I did a lot of work for who was that person. And she was brilliant. And actually having a good relationship with her was absolutely key to me being able to do a good job. So regularly I would walk down to his office. He sat at the end of a very long corridor. And she would look up, see me coming, and just go, okay, and turn around, go back the other way. Those are the sorts of people that you want on your side. And when you have new joiners joining, you want to be able to say to them, this is the person who will be able to help you beyond your manager. They need to know who their stakeholders are, so that the customers, clients, bosses, and so on. They need to know how they're being measured, the behaviours that are rewarded in this culture and those that aren't. What behaviours are looked down on in particular. So it may well be that somebody has come from an organisation where, for example, presenteeism is something that's really rewarded. There are certainly organisations like that exist. In your organisation, that's the last thing perhaps that you're wanting to be encouraging. So sharing information like that is really helpful for people. Now, the single biggest impact on culture, I would suggest, comes from the leader. So comes from you within the organisation. So this is really where I'm looking to make that link between the work that you've been doing around leadership and management. And so knowing this, there are some things that I would like to offer you that I would suggest that you need to reflect on. So whether you like it or not, as leaders within a business, people will be looking at this. This is the leadership shadow model. They're going to be looking at what you say. So what is it that you share with people? What is it that you share on vision, on strategy, on challenges? So when you have a challenge, do you say, oh my God, this is a disaster, and the whole office becomes quite toxic? I've certainly worked with people like that. Or are you handling it in a way that is calm and is okay, well, that's okay, a mistake has been made, and all of the rest of it. So what is it that you say? How is it that you show up? Because this will make a really big difference. People will notice what you do and they will copy that. How you act. So, for example, if you send emails late at night, people will notice that. Is that the culture that you necessarily want? Other people then may feel they need to respond to emails late at night. If you work weird working hours, and certainly I have done over the years, then you might just want to flag that. Look, I work at 10 p.m. at night because that works for me, but you absolutely don't need to. And so those people that have been working with you since you started your organisation, they'll know that, but your new joiners won't necessarily know that. So again, just be really conscious about that. Yeah, or schedule your emails. That's another thing that you can do. The things that you prioritise. So who gets your time? So who do you have feedback conversations with? Who do you take to meetings with you when you're going to talk to clients? People will notice that. They'll notice what you prioritize. And finally, what is it that you are actually measuring? What is it that you are rewarding? What is it that you are recognizing? So all of these things contribute to what we would describe as the shadow of the leader. And as I've already said, it is you as leaders that will have the biggest impact on your culture, simply because of the role that you occupy. So some questions that you might want to take into this, into your next session is this. So based on your leadership shadow, so what you say, how you act, the things that you prioritize, the things that you measure, what are the positive behaviors that you're exhibiting? So what is it that you already do that people will already see about you, or maybe not see about you if you're now working in a much more virtual way? So therefore, what is it that you're going to need to be more conscious about and about sharing and talking about? And what is it that you need to start or stop doing? Because again, as leaders, you will set the tone, you will set the mood of the organisation. I've seen it happen so many times. If the leader comes back or comes into the office in a bad mood in the morning, for whatever reason, it's probably not even work related, it sort of infects the entire office. It's fascinating how their mood can have that impact. Okay, so 5 more minutes. Couple more things that I want to share with you. So this is around thinking about the communication of your vision and direction within the organisation. I find this fascinating. 90% of employees don't fully understand their company's strategy or know what's expected of them to help achieve company goals. Now that's a real problem, because if people don't understand what it is they're doing and why it is they're doing it in order to achieve company goals, they're not going to be able to act on their own initiative. They're not going to be able to make good decisions on behalf of the company. So one of the things, again, as leaders, that you're going to need to be really conscious of, although you know this inside and out, your employees don't, and particularly as your business grows, they don't know. Those people that joined you early on in your organizational life, they know this stuff. They were there from the beginning. But as your company grows, as you're bringing in new people, they don't know that. So being really conscious about communicating this is important. Now, some of you will have seen this, I suspect, on LinkedIn. It's a really nice image. I like it a lot. But what this is talking to is the way that leaders can use storytelling as part of their repertoire. I'm going to give you some questions in a minute that will help you to tell your organizational story, that will really help to connect people with your vision for your organization. Because actually, while data is helpful, if you can explain things with a story, people are far more likely to remember it. So what you're wanting to be thinking about is, well, okay, as a successful leader, what I want to be doing is motivating my team with stories. So the extent to which you can paint a picture behind the organization's mission and purpose and vision can be really, really powerful, because people don't care about how they're supposed to do their job until they understand why they're doing it. And this is taken from an absolutely brilliant book, which is somewhere in there, called The Storyteller's Secret. So if storytelling in business is something that you're interested in, I would really recommend The Storyteller's Secret. It's a really nice text. So the power of story. So why is story so effective? Well, as humans, we're really programmed to be able to tell and to listen to and engage with stories. It's how we've communicated for thousands and thousands of years. It's sort of innate within us. If you think about cave paintings before people could write, it really taught to the ability for people to be able to survive. You know, here's a picture of this, don't eat this, it will kill you. That big fluffy thing, run from that, that will kill you. So our survival has really been based around our ability to be able to tell, to listen to and understand stories. We've passed this down through generations, and there's real science behind this, which I don't have enough time to really go into detail around. But what happens when we tell stories is a handful of things. So what happens is the listener who is listening to this piece of information that is being told as a story, they can imagine it for themselves, they can elaborate for themselves. It's much easier to recall a story than it is facts and data. So if you're looking to engage people with your mission, with your vision, the extent to which you can tell a story about it will support people in being able to remember it. What's really interesting is that what happens when people tell stories is there's an emotional connection which is built. If you look at the brain scan of somebody who is listening to a story and somebody who is telling a story, there is a literal mind morphing. The same parts of the brain light up in the storyteller and in the person listening to the story. It's really powerful stuff. It provides motivation for action and creates a shared experience for people. And at the risk of embarrassing Elizabeth, she is an absolute past master at storytelling. This is her background. She worked in theatre for a number of years. She understands story. So if you're stuck with any of this stuff or want to explore this a little bit more, can I recommend you, or can I point you in Elizabeth's direction to really think more about this? So a couple of thoughts for you before I leave you. Here's some phrases that you could use to help connect people to the story of your organisation. It's essential that we all feel connected to where our organisation is going. If we feel like we understand the role we play, it's much more motivating and ensures we're fully aligned. So our mission is clear. That's a big assuming that you do have a clear mission. But assuming you do have a clear mission, you're then going to want to talk about it's about helping our customers to X, Y, Z. It's about ensuring our clients X, whatever it might be. And so what I've looked to do is to boil it down, to tell our organisational story in a way that I think cuts through and helps us as a team to connect. So these are phrases that you might want to take. You might want to use these in your onboarding. You might want to use it with existing employees. You might want to use it on a team day. You can use this at any point that you want to. But again, organisations large and small that I work with are doing this a lot more because they recognise how powerful it is. So for you, here's how you might want to go about telling your organisational story. And again, I've got some statements here that you might want to complete either for yourself separately or in the next session. I founded this organisation because I felt really passionately, or I noticed a gap in the market, or whatever it might be. And I love working here because we've got a culture that is whatever it might be. When we're operating at our best, our impact on our customers is this. So this is really talking about the why of your organisation. You've heard that Simon Sinek done to death. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. You've heard that a million times, but this is what this is really tapping into. My personal vision for us is, so this is really allowing people to imagine where this organisation could go and how that might work for them and how they might be part of that excitement that we talked about in those previous slides. That's where storytelling comes to play. And this connects to our ability to deliver the mission and purpose through doing these things. So that is storytelling in a nutshell. Like I say, very much a whistle-stop tour, but something that I wanted to introduce you to, and you might want to think about building on in future sessions, because like I say, one of the trends that I'm really seeing with organisations is the way that they are telling stories and using story to engage people in them, both internally and externally. So we've covered quite a lot. I said that we would do these 3 things. We've talked about attracting great talent, making sure that your practices are inclusive. You've got some interview questions. You can have the slides afterwards, by all means. And finally, we've touched on a little bit on culture, the importance of your role as leaders within that, and how you as leaders might want to use storytelling as a tool which will help you to engage with people. So I'm just having a little look at time. I'm 1 minute over, for which I apologise. But I hope this has been useful. I'm more than happy to stay on for a minute, or you've got my email address, I suspect, so do feel free to email me if that's useful. But back to you, Jane.